So Malcolm, remind us, it's been a few years since the original Tipping Point. Remind us of the thesis of that book.
The idea was that when I wrote The Tipping Point, I had just been covering the AIDS epidemic for the Washington Post.
Oh, so you come to this as a journalist. That's your fundamental chops.
Who had just been immersed in epidemiology for like a good 6 years.
Let me just remind people, epidemiology, the study of
how epidemics behave.
Epidemics and how they spread and how they are contained or even...
How we infect each other.
How we infect each other.
How we infect each other. That's basically epidemic.
And like so many scientific professions, there are certain moments when epidemiologists matter, and there are certain moments when we forget about them and they have conversations among themselves. And HIV was one of those occasions when suddenly they seemed, they were part of the cultural conversation. COVID was another. All of a sudden we heard from these people who we don't normally pay any attention to them. And so I had been immersed in the world of epidemiologists, and I was so fascinated by the peculiar way in which epidemics of disease behave. I was in the library at NYU, Boeb's library one day. I used to go there and hang out in the stacks and read academic journals at random.
That is so geeky of you.
It's so geeky. It is very geeky.
We
Gotta love it.
Erect a statue to you for this, okay?
And one day, I remember this moment. I was in the HM.1 aisle.
Okay.
And I was reading back issues.
As one would be.
And Neil, don't tell me you haven't done this, because you have.
Go on, keep going.
By the way, I'm a HM.2 guy myself.
And I was reading a bound volume of back issues of the American Journal of Sociology, and I read a paper by a guy called Jonathan Crane, and it was the whole premise of the paper was, let's use epidemiological models to examine social pathology, crime, delinquency, teenage pregnancy.
Love it.
Do they spread in the same way?
What date was that article?
I think it was from the article was from the 1980s.
Oh, so
okay, so it was a modern article.
It wasn't like the 1800s
but
or anything.
At the time he wrote that was a very novel idea.
Yeah,
because he was literally taking the formal principles of disease epidemiology and laying them over
as a social overlay.
Problems. That's how I think of the term, not specifically disease, but human behavior.
Yeah.
And how you might track that and understand it. So if it began there, I'm very impressed by that.
Well, it's interesting. Did it begin there? It was the first time I had ever seen, and if you read the article, it was clear that there wasn't a rich literature of people in that formally applying. I mean, they may have informally have used that, but formally applying the techniques to, he showed, for example, that
these would be mathematical techniques, wouldn't
yes,
they? Yes,
mathematical techniques. And one of the things he showed, for example, was that when the percentage of professionals, so people with higher education, some fell below a certain critical threshold, social problems exploded, which I thought was incredibly interesting.
Yes.
And he tracked across all of these neighborhoods and looked at outmigration of a certain kind of role model, in other words. When you remove role models, the first couple you remove doesn't make them, and then all of a sudden there's a kind of moment when, boom,
a tipping point. A tipping point.
So I had just been. I was in the library in New York in 1996, and I had just been living through the beginnings of this extraordinary decline in crime in New York, and I was trying to make sense of it because nobody could explain to me why would crime fall by whatever it fell by precipitously in the 90s.
And everyone, of course, wants to take credit for that.
Of course. Everyone wants to take credit.
Yeah. And it wasn't just New York City. It was the whole country.
Although later it was just New York City. This is interesting because there's two New York City crime declines.
Keep going here.
But and no one could explain why. And I wanted to understand it conceptually. And it struck me when I read that article that this was the conceptual explanation, that crime was a contagious phenomenon. And it had just tipped in the way that epidemics often tip. And that was the genesis of that book, The Tipping Point.
Wow.
Okay.
That's fascinating.
It all begins in the stacks of an academic library. I'm just playing to you right now, Neil.
Okay, no, we're good.